Hey everybody, it is Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you do not have to.
You say it's your birthday. Happy birthday, Moshe.
Thanks, Jill. What do you ask kids? Do you feel any older today? Do you feel...
Are you one? Are you two? How do you feel at the age of 41, right?
42, Jill.
Oh.
But I appreciate you making me a year younger.
Where does the time go? I swear I felt like it was last year that Alex threw you the 40th birthday party. But
nope.
Time flies.
Alas, that was the 41st. Anyway, feeling good. Believe it or not, I guess I'm 21 times 2. So I'm thinking back to my 21st birthday. What I didn't know back then. What I would tell 21-year-old Moshe about what the future holds.
As you had your first drink, right?
Oh, yeah. as I found myself passed out in a bathroom in a bar.
Okay, we digress. Moshe, I hope you enjoy the festivities that Alex has planned for you guys.
Yes, we have a surprise. I have a surprise, I should say. So I'll let you know tomorrow what it is. I'll find out in just a couple hours here. And Jill, I should say, we're the beginning of Gemini season here. You have a birthday coming up in a couple weeks. So both of us within about 3 weeks' time.
Both of us with our dual personalities.
You're getting 4 people for the price of 1 here on the Mo News podcast.
We Geminis, jack of all trades, master of none. At least I am.
Jill, we spin a lot of plates here on the Mo News pod, as many of you can probably tell by listening every day.
All right, so let's get to some headlines. Prosecutors from the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, apply for arrest warrants for Hamas leaders and the Israeli Prime Minister, what this means, and the reaction. What now, after the Iranian president and foreign minister have been killed in a helicopter crash? Finally, that cargo ship that crashed into the Baltimore bridge moves back to port. So when can the crew finally get off the boat? Prosecutors in Donald Trump's hush money trial rest their case after 20 witnesses. When we might have a verdict. A new trend in the job market, more moms are working 9 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Working 9 to 2. What a way to make a living.
It is. That is a way to make a living.
That is a way to make a living, everybody.
A new study focuses on what happens if you stay on the weight loss drug Wegovy for years. The FDA gives Elon Musk's Neuralink the green light for a second patient. And this is the type of commencement speaker that I wish I had at my graduation. The billionaire who gave each student $1,000 will tell you where and why. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, I'll tell you about everything else that happened besides the fact that I was born on this day.
All right, the International Criminal Court's prosecutor said on Monday that he has requested potential arrest warrants for 3 Hamas leaders, as well as the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Defense Minister over actions in the ongoing war in Gaza. The International Criminal Court, or the ICC, prosecutor Karim Khan said that he had reasonable grounds to believe that the 5 men, quote, bear criminal responsibility for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. Khan applied for arrest warrants for Hamas's Gaza chief, Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, his deputy in Gaza and the head of the military wing of Hamas, and Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas's political bureau, who is now based in Qatar. He also applied for an arrest warrant for Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They have overseen Israel's offensive against Hamas in Gaza since the Hamas massacre of Israelis on October 7th. The move was widely expected, but the timing did take a number of people by surprise, given that the ICC has sat on other potential prosecutions around the world for years. Now, as far as Hamas, the ICC prosecutor said his office had grounds to believe that the 3 terror leaders were criminally liable for extermination as a crime against humanity, taking hostages, rape, and other acts of sexual violence, torture, and cruel treatment in the context of captivity. Khan said that Sinwar, Deif, and Hania were responsible for, quote, war crimes and crimes against humanity, including the killing of hundreds of Israeli civilians in attacks perpetrated by Hamas. He added that they believed that hostages have been subject to sexual violence, including rape, while being held in captivity, adding that these individuals planned and instigated the commission of crimes on the 7th of October, 2023, and have, through their own actions, including personal visits to hostages shortly after their kidnapping, acknowledged their responsibility for those crimes. As far as Israel, we should note this is the first time that the ICC has ever asked for arrest warrants against democratically elected leaders. Among the alleged crimes the court listed for the warrant to arrest the two Israeli leaders was the willful killing of civilians, starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, and persecution as a crime against humanity. Khan believed Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant bore criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity, including using starvation as a weapon of war and, quote, intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population in Gaza. He said this occurred through the imposition of a total siege of the Gaza Strip that involved completely closing the 3 border crossing points starting on October 8th of 2023 for extended periods. Israel, along with the U.S. and other European allies, called out the court for a false equivalency between Hamas and Israel.
Yeah, the statements came one after one on a Monday after this ICC announcement, which was first revealed in an interview with Christian Amanpour over on CNN by the ICC prosecutor. Interestingly, in Israel, even those who hate Netanyahu, who are outraged by Netanyahu, who want him to go, found the comparison between Hamas leaders and the Israeli leaders completely unacceptable, a moral equivalency that does not exist as far as they're concerned. They note that Israel has made humanitarian aid available and blame the UN and other organizations for failing to get it to the right people in Gaza, claiming Hamas is stealing it from the people, etc. And so they were pushing back hard on Monday. The U.S. also pushing back hard. President Biden calling the arrest warrant for the Israeli officials outrageous, adding that whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is, quote, no equivalence, none, between Israel and Hamas. We will stand always with Israel against its threats to security. Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, called it shameful, saying the ICC actually doesn't have jurisdiction in this matter, that the ICC has general rules allowing countries to conduct their own investigations, and they did not allow Israel to do that in this case. Blinken said that this jeopardizes the ceasefire. Remember, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, is different from the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. The ICJ prosecutes countries. The ICC, the one we're talking about in this case, prosecutes individuals. So just important to make that clear here. And one thing we should note, the ICC has about 120 member countries. Among those who are not members of the ICC, Israel, the US, Ukraine, Russia, China, about 70 countries or so, also not part of the ICC, Hamas. So in both cases here, Israel and Hamas, neither is a party to the ICC, which I'll explain here in a second. But first things first, what happens next? He's announced an intention to apply for arrest warrants for these 5 individuals, the 3 Hamas leaders and the 2 Israeli leaders. So the application for the arrest warrant will go to a panel of pre-trial judges. They'll determine whether there's evidence to support the arrest warrants. Now, that could take weeks, that could take months. Then, officially, arrest warrants will be issued. But we should note the ICC has no means to enforce arrest warrants, has no police force of its own. And so ultimately here, it really becomes a rhetorical slap on the wrist and effectively a travel ban of sorts, because the expectation is while the ICC doesn't have a police force, they expect all member countries to arrest those who they issued arrest warrants for. So in the case of Vladimir Putin, who received one of these arrest warrants back in 2023, he has avoided traveling to countries that are ICC members who he thinks would actually go ahead and arrest him. So in the case of these Hamas leaders, you have Ismail Haniyeh, who lives in Qatar. Well, who else isn't a part of the ICC? Qatar. So he will ensure that he stays there or in other countries that are not part of the ICC. Then you have the other 2 Hamas leaders, Mohammed Deif and Yahya Sinwar, in Gaza. They're in hiding in tunnels. And so likely will face no arrest either. Now, who is a party to it? The Palestinian Authority. They and that was the avenue here the ICC took, saying, well, one of the parties here that signed on to this in 2015 is the Palestinian Authority. They control parts of the West Bank, but not Gaza. And by the way, if they could somehow control Gaza again, which may be the case at some point in the future, they're probably not arresting Sinwar and Deif because they live in fear of Hamas. Remember, Hamas launched a coup in 2007 that effectively took control of Gaza. So effectively, Deif and Sinwar, they're in hiding. And then you're left with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, as well as the Defense Minister Gallant. Well, Israel's not a party. And they'll probably ensure that they won't travel to countries where they fear being arrested if these arrest warrants are actually issued. Remember, the U.S. is not a party to this because the U.S., going back 20 years now, has felt that the ICC has major issues, has bias issues, that it doesn't address some people who are very much deserving of trials for their crimes against humanity, who haven't. Among those, Kim Jong-un, the Chinese government, the Yemeni government, the Syrian government. The list goes on in terms of various crimes that have been witnessed around the world and who the ICC has chosen to prosecute and who have they chosen not to prosecute. So effectively, the Israeli leaders could travel to the U.S., no issue in this case, because the U.S. is not a party to the ICC. So again, this can be seen as a moral slap on the wrist by the ICC here, effectively travel limitations. But this is seen as a huge failure by the current Israeli government to conduct the war in a way that would have prevented this. The Israelis again say that they've made enough aid available, that they've been conducting this war in a very moral way. And they have arguments to back that up. At the same time, you have aid organizations and others who have taken issue with some of the tactics the Israelis have taken, which has led here to the ICC moving ahead here with an application for arrest warrants. So that's where things stand as far as the questions we're getting, Jill, on Instagram. Does it change anything on the ground? Nope. Does it change when this war is going to end? Nope. In fact, Blinken says this could postpone a ceasefire here because of the interference here by the ICC. And there have been a number of legislators in the U.S., senators and members of Congress, who have threatened the ICC not to move ahead with this or face ramifications. TBD what those ramifications are.
All right, now to the latest from Iran and the aftermath of the president and foreign minister being killed in a helicopter crash. Iranian authorities sought to project a sense of order and control on Monday. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, saying that there would be no disruption to the government's work. On Monday, he said that the first vice president, Mohammed Mukber, would assume the role of acting president and must organize elections for a new president within 50 days. The supreme leader set June 28th as the date for the election to determine Raisi's successor. A reminder that it's not really a free election, as the supreme leader will approve who is on the ballot to replace him, and the next president, like Raisi, will report to Khamenei. As we've been telling you, not much is expected in the way of change with the new leadership, since much of the foreign policy, military, and domestic decisions rest with the supreme leader and the religious clerics who run Iran, which the executive branch reports to. Now, as for the accident, Iranian state television saying that the helicopter had crashed Sunday because of poor weather conditions and, quote, technical issues. The charred wreckage of the helicopter was found early on Monday after an overnight search in blizzard conditions. It was carrying Raisi, the foreign minister, and 6 other passengers. Notably, he was flying in a Bell 212 chopper, originally designed in the United States. It is a widely used civilian version of the Vietnam-era Huey military helicopter, operated by armed forces and businesses around the globe. It dates back to the 60s and 70s, when Iran was an ally of the United States before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. A number of Iran's planes and choppers date back to that era.
Yeah, the Iranian Air Force actually maintains 5 of these U.S.-designed aircraft for their VIP squadron, one that was involved in the presidential crash here. And they can't really maintain them very well due to the sanctions that have been in place now for more than 40 years. But for some reason, the Iranians haven't gone to another brand here. The average age globally of these Bells is more than 40 years old, which means some leaders in Iran did find a way to blame this crash on the U.S., despite the fact that it was a mechanical pilot issue, a technical issue, which we should make a point of saying the Iranians often blame things on outside entities. But in this case, owned up to it, that it was a technical issue internally. Still, Javad Zarif, he's the former Iranian foreign minister, argued on Monday that the U.S. was technically indirectly responsible for the crash here. He said in a statement, one of the causes of this heartbreaking incident is the U.S., which by sanctioning the sale of the aviation industry to Iran He said in a statement on Monday, one of the causes of this heartbreaking incident is the United States, which by sanctioning the sale of the aviation industry to Iran caused the martyrdom of the president and his companions, and the U.S.'s crime will be recorded in the minds of the Iranian people and history. Effectively saying we couldn't get the parts for these choppers, and so you, the U.S., are at fault here. The U.S. saying we have no responsibility for this. Notably, again, the U.S. was very close to the Shah, who ran Iran before the Islamic leadership took over in 1979 in their coup. And so the Iranians have had more than 4 decades here to get themselves planes that they could actually maintain. We should note, and I think we said this on the podcast yesterday, Jill, that one of the higher crash rates in the world is in Iran because they're using old Boeing planes, old Bell helicopters, and because of international sanctions, can't get the parts for them. Still, I should say, despite the Zarif comment here, noting again, these were technical issues. As far as reaction inside the country, among the people, the nearly 100 million people who live in Iran, effectively you have 3 groups. You had those celebrating, those who were mostly quiet, and those who were actually upset, who are close to the regime here. As far as the people celebrating, for the most part, doing so quietly, given the ramifications of celebrating openly the death of the president of the country, but still many in that group and many in sort of the mostly quiet, meh group don't believe that there will be any wholesale change in the country, given the authority, or I should say lack of authority, the president had and the new president will have, that ultimately this is the supreme leader's country. It's a theocracy run by the clerics, and the president and executive branch report into them. Within Iran, when you look at Raisi's legacy here, his tenure included these protests that swept the country in the last couple of years. That was after the death of the 22-year-old Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody after she didn't follow the hijab, the headdress laws of Iran. An estimated 20,000 people, protesters, were jailed over the protests, 500 people killed, including 60 children, according to the Women Life Freedom protest. The police still continue to this day to violently arrest women for refusing the hijab law. So that's what's been happening domestically. And again, not much hope among critics that anything will change. Foreign policy-wise, Raisi and his foreign minister, pretty hardline. They really pushed hard on this axis of resistance, building up Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, etc., against the U.S. and Israel, and pushing forward with the nuclear weapons program inside Iran, getting Iran ever the more closer to building nuclear weapons. So the question for the supreme leader and the theocracy here is, as they put up candidates for this election, how many will be in line with what Raisi was doing, or will they take a different tack here? That's something that the various folks who are the experts in Iranian regime politics will be watching closely. Remember, it's not really an election in Iran. The candidates are chosen by the supreme leader, which is why you've seen in some of the most recent elections, turnout continue to decrease as people across Iran say, what's the point? We're being given choices, none of whom we really like.
I heard David Ignatius, he's Washington Post columnist. He was on Morning Joe yesterday, and he gave the analogy that Iran is basically on a one-way street to the end of this regime. And the question is just, how long will it last? No one thinks that they're going to be around. There's so much public dissent. For the most part, you have people who genuinely dislike the regime that are celebrating the death of the president. But to your point, this is what they've got for now. So no real change. It's just a question of when and how that change is eventually going to happen.
Yeah, there was hope that these protests, remember when we were watching those early protests in the fall of 2022, the thought was like, oh my God, this could be the beginning of the end for the regime here. The protests were active. There was shooting going on, rebel groups starting up, and the regime still was successfully able to crack down here. They've invested heavily in a surveillance state, in the IRGC, in their military state. And so to build a movement from within that can actually take out the regime, incredibly difficult. And by the way, Jill, that's one of the reasons why they're focused on nuclear weapons. Because with nuclear weapons, it becomes even more unlikely that you're able to take out the regime, because now they have an atom bomb. And will they use it to save themselves is the big question. And so that was the pivot point for North Korea. right? Can you take out the regime of then Kim Jong-un's father? Well, once he announced he had nuclear weapons, it became all the more difficult. Now, one case where you did see a coup, a change in government, now again, a different structure there, etc., was in Pakistan, which actually went through a coup and a change of regime despite having nuclear weapons. But that came from the military. And Iran is a different dynamic. In this case, you want to see the revolution come from the people. But will they be able to do so? Again, there were hopes in 22, 23. Now folks are disenchanted again. But to your point, it's inevitable. Just how long will it take for change to happen and for this regime to sort of run out the clock?
Time for the speed read from the Baltimore Sun. Nearly 8 weeks after it rammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, the container ship Dolly is afloat again.
Hello, Dolly. Was it written about this boat?
The ship was pulled back to the port of Baltimore Monday morning, making the 2.5-mile journey surrounded by tugboats. The moving of the Dolly is a crucial step in the effort to fully reopen the main channel to the port, which was blocked in the early hours of March 26th when the Dolly lost power and hit the bridge. The bridge collapsed on impact, killing 6 workers doing repairs on the bridge roadway, clogging the waterway with around 50,000 tons of metal and debris, and disrupting the commerce of one of the nation's key shipping hubs.
Yeah, this has been a project, and this will be a project. Moving the nearly 1,000-foot-long Dolly was a complex and risky task, given that the ship was pinned in place by thousands of tons of mangled steel. They had to use explosives to get some of the steel off here. The salvage and recovery operation has involved more than 1,000 workers, a number of barges, cranes, helicopters, Coast Guard cutters. And they have gradually, slowly but surely returned access to the port here. They had a temporary channel of 11 feet. They've been able to dig up now up to 45 feet. Now, to create a permanent channel here that'll get ships out, you need to be 50 feet deep, 700 feet wide. They've set a goal of the end of this month to get there. In the meantime, the investigation continues. They're still trying to determine more details about the cause of the accident. The preliminary report we told you about last week found that the Dolly had experienced at least 2 electrical failures before it left the port that night. The outages, they believe, contributed to the accident here, which came about, of course, when the electricity failed again on the vessel, leading to a loss of propulsion, steering capacity, that likely led to it crashing into the bridge. Jill, you mentioned at the top, the crew. There are still 21 crew members aboard. 2 months later, they are 20 Indians, 1 Sri Lankan. They've had their cell phones confiscated by the FBI. They've been living on the boat as there have been these controlled explosions. But it's still maybe weeks or even months before they can leave due to a number of complications, including that the U.S. visas they had have expired while they've been trapped on the ship. Now, the rules have been that, if a ship is out in the water, you need to keep it crewed. So the crew stayed aboard because they know this ship. They also had a bunch of food and resources aboard the ship because it was going to make its way slowly to Sri Lanka. In the meantime, though, it has now been pulled back to port, but the crew is not allowed to set foot onto U.S. soil because, again, their 1-month visas have expired in the 2 months that they've been trapped on the Dolly. Their unions are calling for an extension or renewal of the visa. They're also calling for them to get new cell phones that are functional. Apparently, they were given new cell phones, but not with the SIM cards they had before. So still up in the air here as to this 21-person crew and when they will eventually be let off the boat.
All right, now to an update on the Trump criminal trial from ABC News. After calling 20 witnesses and showing jurors over 200 pieces of evidence, prosecutors in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial have rested their case against the former president. Across 4 weeks of testimony, prosecutors have laid out their case against Trump by telling a story of sex, schemes, and lies related to the 2016 election. Prosecutors allege that Trump falsified business records in 2017 when he repaid his lawyer Michael Cohen for the $130,000 payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels so that she wouldn't speak publicly about her allegations that she had sex with Trump. He is accused of labeling the payment as legal expenses, committing alleged felony fraud that helped him win the 2016 presidential election. Trump has pleaded not guilty and denied any wrongdoing. The 2 witnesses that gave perhaps the most gripping testimony were Stormy Daniels, the woman paid the hush money, and Cohen, who coordinated it all, Cohen admitted that the 11 invoices he submitted to Trump in 2017 to cover the payment that he made out of his own pocket were false records. And he cast doubt on the defense's assertions that the $35,000 checks that he received each month after were actually a legal retainer. Cohen also tied Trump to the broader conspiracy that prosecutors aim to prove around quashing multiple stories about him.
Yeah, he said this wasn't the only hush money payment that Trump also called legal expenses. But notably yesterday also, Cohen, who is a flawed spokesperson here for the prosecution, testified that he stole money from Trump while he worked for Trump as a form of, quote, self-help. He said that Trump lowered his bonus, so he decided to take some money. So he decided to steal some money from Trump from some of these checks that he was getting to do other things with. Now, his admission here that he stole from his then boss, that was raised here by the defense team, by Trump's defense team yesterday, could hurt his credibility with jurors who will be charged with deciding whether Trump should be found guilty. So questions here around Stormy Daniels' character, around Michael Cohen's character, could factor in here because the jurors have to determine beyond a reasonable doubt unanimously that Trump committed these crimes. Now, prosecution is done. The defense is up. Now, the attorneys for Trump say they think they're not going to call that many witnesses. They might actually call only 2 in this time. Trump had said at one point that he was going to testify. That now seems pretty unlikely, but everything is unpredictable when it comes to Trump and these trials. Notably, the first witness they put up yesterday, a lawyer named Robert Costello, the defense didn't actually want to put up, but Trump really likes him, so he put him up. So he apparently pushed them to have Costello on the stand. And Costello got into it with the judge. It led the judge yesterday to actually clear the courtroom and reprimand Costello for apparently making snide remarks and expressing dissatisfaction at rulings the judge was making. So he clears the courtroom, clears the jurors out, clears everyone out, and yells at Costello effectively saying, "What are you doing? I'm the judge here." So one of the questions is, did Costello help Trump's case? Either way, again, the prosecution is done here. The defense can move pretty quickly, and then it goes off to the jury in the first ever criminal trial, Jill, of a former president. The bottom line, legally unclear what the verdict is. So far, I will say in the court of public opinion, we get to one of our favorite words, Jill, meh, is what I hear from most folks, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, if he is found to be not guilty, you've got to think this will probably go down as one of the worst decisions by a DA.
As they said in The Wire, since we're talking about Baltimore anyway, when you come for the king, you best not miss.
There's very little I enjoy more, Moshe, than Wire references, and that would be about Omar, correct?
Yeah, you're right, Jill. You got it. Ding, 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 ding. One of my favorite quotes from The Wire.
All right, from the Market Snacks newsletter, in for breakfast, out by lunch. Part-time work hits a record in the United States as more women, particularly moms, enter the labor force. Some new Labor Department numbers show that more Americans than ever are working less than 35 hours a week. In March, there was a record 29.2 million part-time employees, making up over 17% of the workforce. That is the biggest slice of the job market since 2020. As companies still struggle to fill pandemic-depleted openings, some are offering part-time options and flexi-time, as they're calling it. And with inflation eating into budgets, more than half of Americans have taken on a side gig in addition to their main job in the past year. Most American part-timers are doing it for reasons like childcare, education, or family obligations, not necessarily because they couldn't find a full-time job. While teens and retirees have long made up the bulk of part-timers, prime working-age women are now taking the lead. After millions of women dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic, a record share of women ages 25 to 54 are now participating. Women typically shoulder most childcare duties, but in March, the rate of employed women with a child under the age of 5 rose to nearly 70%.
Yeah, part-time work has boosted the labor force participation of women with around a fifth now, about 20% of women working part-time as childcare costs soar. Childcare services, based on the recent numbers, have grown at more than double the rate of inflation. So bottom line, the headline from Market Snacks here is 9 to 2 is the new 9 to 5. And women aren't alone. We've seen a number of younger Americans who said that they're prioritizing personal development over the 9 to 5 grind. In particular, they definitely didn't want jobs that didn't have a work from home option. Meanwhile, and another trend that we're watching, more than 4 million Americans could retire this year as boomers, the last of the boomers, begin their retirement. So women, as well as increasingly immigrants, are helping to fill the labor gap here.
From NBC News, amid the growing popularity of drugs used for weight loss like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, and Zepbound, one question has remained for users: what happens if they stay on these drugs for years? Well, now a new study released earlier this month by Novo Nordisk, which is the maker of both Ozempic and Wegovy, is shedding some light on what the long-term results look like for people on these weight loss medications. This is the longest study they have conducted so far of semaglutide for weight loss. This one, though, focused solely on Wegovy. The study found that the majority of people on the drug lost weight, on average about 10% of their body weight in the first 15 months of using the drug, and then sustained that weight loss over 4 years with continued use.
So the results came from a clinical trial here of over 17,000 people with pre-existing heart disease, as Novo Nordisk was testing Wegovy for its heart benefits in people who are overweight and obese. So they found that top line number, Jill, as you noted, the 10% body weight that was kept off. We should note, by the way, that about 17%, 1 in 5 of the patients on the 4-year timeline did withdraw at some point due to a side effect. Among the side effects, nausea, constipation, as well as, for some, irreversible gallbladder and pancreatic disease. We've been telling you about Ozempic and Wegovy for a while. They're part of this GLP-1 receptor that help people produce insulin to lower the amount of sugar in the blood, initially for diabetes, and they were found to have this incredible weight loss effect. So it's hard to go a day where you don't hear about Ozempic.
It is crazy that the longest study they have is 4 years. That doesn't feel like, in the scheme of things, a very long time.
Well, we're going to learn a lot in the coming years, especially as all these people get on and how it affects different people's bodies. And we should know, Jill, this study came from the manufacturer of Wegovy, Novo Nordisk. So, of course, that leads to, assertions or accusations of bias here. So we will be looking for some independent studies in the coming years as well.
From the Wall Street Journal, the FDA has given the green light to Elon Musk's Neuralink to implant its brain chip in a second person. It comes as the company has proposed fixes for a problem that happened with the first test participant. The fixes include embedding some of the device's ultra-thin wires a bit deeper into the brain. The first participant, his name, Noland Arbaugh, is opening up about the impact of the device on his life and the emotional roller coaster he has experienced before, during, and after the device lost part of its functionality. In the days after his January implantation, Arbaugh used the Neuralink implant to control a cursor on a computer screen with only his thoughts. Arbaugh is a quadriplegic with no movement below his shoulders for the past 8 years. He says he was suddenly able to communicate with friends, play games, and interact with the world in ways that hadn't seemed possible after his accident. But then a month after his surgery, he noticed that the device was no longer working as well. Most of the threads implanted in his brain had come loose and were no longer reading the electrical signals needed to translate his thoughts into cursor movements.
Yeah, apparently Neuralink told him that only about 15% of the threads inserted in his brain remain in place, but they have stabilized. And the software changes made by the company later helped him regain many of the device's capabilities, which he has demonstrated in some recent live stream. So Neuralink saying here, since they had never implanted this in a human before, they learned a lot. They didn't know how much the brain moves inside the skull. So it found that his brain moved up to 3 times more than they expected. To keep threads in place, one of their solutions here is to implant them 8 millimeters deeper into the brain's motor cortex. What we're talking about here, by the way, is about the size of a quarter. And ultimately, they initially put it in about 3 to 5 millimeters. Now they're going to put it in about 8 millimeters. There's about 64 external threads. Each of them is thinner than a human hair that are inserted into the brain's motor cortex to relay neural signals. Jill, pretty incredible stuff here. Still, that it's functional in the first one. They got approval for the second one now. They do hope to be able to expand this further. Neuralink says that they have more than 1,000 quadriplegics who have signed up in their patient registry. About 100 of them qualify if they're able to implant in more and more people.
I actually got a little emotional hearing the first patient's description of how the implant changed his life. You could just imagine going 8 years without really being able to communicate at all, and then suddenly having that ability. So the potential here, just incredible. From the Associated Press, we've been talking commencement speeches. Well, how about one where you walk away with $1,000? Billionaire philanthropist Rob Hale surprised the graduating class of about 1,000 students at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth last week. During his address, he pointed to a nearby truck holding envelopes stuffed with cash. Huddling under ponchos and umbrellas at the soggy ceremony, the graduates yelled and cheered as Hale announced that he was showering cash upon them. Security guards then lugged the cash-filled duffel bags onto the stage. Hale told the students that they would each get $1,000, but there was a condition. They were to keep $500 and then give the rest away. Hale said that the greatest joy that he and his wife, Karen, had experienced in their lives had come from the act of giving. So Hale told the students, we want to give you 2 gifts. The first is our gift to you, and the second is the gift of giving.
Yeah, he said these trying times have heightened the need for sharing, caring, and giving. Our community needs you and your generosity more than ever. Jill, pretty incredible, sort of the Oprah, the famous Oprah episode modeled for commencement speech. You get 1,000 and you get 1,000 and you get 1,000. He is the founder, if you haven't heard of him, and chief executive of Granite Telecommunications. He is estimated by Forbes to be worth $5.4 billion. He has a minority stake in the Boston Celtics NBA franchise, and it's the 4th year in a row he has done this. Last year, it was students at UMass Boston. Before that, it was Roxbury Community College. Before that, Quincy College. But, important note, the UMass Dartmouth administration did not tell the students that he was coming. So they had no idea what was in store. Notably, graduating seniors that didn't attend the commencement ceremony missed out on the money. So miss a day, miss the ceremony, miss a lot.
Okay, Moshe, if you got $1,000 and had to give away 500 of it, what would you do?
I think there's a lot of important causes out there, Jill. I think there's a lot of really great nonprofits and charities doing, some really important work without, picking one here on the podcast. I
think I would give out cold, hard cash. Have you ever seen those videos?
Oh, like stand outside like a Walmart and give people like $1 a piece, $10 a piece? That's cool.
No, like more than that. Like $50.
You only have $500 in this case, Jill.
But that's okay. So you do it for 10 people.
So 10.
And
you
make a bigger difference.
You would give 10 people $50 with your $500.
Or even 5 people $100. Go and pay for, I'd say, a percentage of their groceries, because we all know $100 doesn't go that far in the grocery store. But I think that I would do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was due.
You were due. Well, that's very nice, Jill. When you go back to school, maybe Rob Hale will speak at your commencement ceremony. Are you going back to school anytime soon?
No, I already have a master's and free time. And
we're not
going
to call you Dr. Wagner anytime soon. All right, on this day in history, we begin in 1881. Speaking of charities and nonprofits, the American Red Cross was founded on this day in 1881 to provide humanitarian aid to the victims of wars and natural disasters. On this day in 1927, American pilot Charlie Lindbergh landed in Paris, successfully completing the first solo, nonstop transatlantic flight. 5 years later, Amelia Earhart would become the first woman to make a solo, nonstop flight over the Atlantic. On this day in 1956, the U.S. conducted the first airborne test of a hydrogen bomb over the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. And we end, of course, with some pop culture. On this day in 1992, 32 years ago, The Real World premiered on MTV. Jill, I remember being a Real World addict. The first one took place in New York. Then I think they had L.A., San Francisco, Seattle. I was a hardcore in the mid 90s there with Real World, those first few seasons.
The original reality show.
MTV really innovated there in the 90s with some of the concepts that we're still talking about today. On this day, also 1992, Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for the last time. And we end here with a bit of music history. On this day, 53 years ago, Marvin Gaye released What's Going On. And one more musical item, Jill, this is one of my favorites. I think one of the best fiddle solos there is in music history. Devil Goes Down to Georgia came out 45 years ago today by the Charlie Daniels Band.
I would agree with you about the fiddle. All right, what's going on? Moshe, it's your birthday. A whole lot of news as well. We want to thank everyone for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. And Moshe, have a very, very happy birthday.
Thanks, Jill. You know, it's the best birthday gift in the world if you share this podcast with a friend or family member and leave us a review. Appreciate all of you. And Jill, I'll see you back here tomorrow, 1 year older.
That is a good sell, Moshe. If you're not going to do it today for Moshe's birthday, then when will you?
When will you? Appreciate all of you, regardless. Thanks, Jill.